Alright, so let's continue. So now we need to work on the accounts screen, and I think now we can actually start with the interface using which the user can create links, or to say they can shorten the long URLs. So I'm thinking of something like when the user clicks on this button, just like what we have planned for the login sign up modal, like to have a modal, we can do the same thing for this thing. Like when the user clicks on it, we can show a modal, and in this case we require two things from the user. We require the name and the long URL. All the other stuff, I think the timestamp, the short URL, which would be the short code, and the total number of clicks, it is something which is related to the backend. It's not something that we require from the user, so we just need these two things. So when the user clicks on it, we will be showing a modal where we have two input fields, one for the name and the other one for the long URL. Now that being said, let's do that. And one more thing that I just noticed, one second. So although it's not something which we will be working on immediately, but I think I kind of missed out to add the delete button on the link card, which is something which, like, it has to be there. So let's do that. One second. Getting to the link card component, over here we can show the button somewhere around here next to the copy button. Let's do that. We have the button for copy. We can copy the same thing, and we can change the text to be delete. For the color, let's see, we have the secondary. Let's go with that. Did we override the secondary? Yep, we have. Okay, that's fine. For the variant, we can go with contained so that it has a background color. And what else? Disable elevation. Yep, in order to remove the elevation. The other thing is we would want to add some spacing between these three elements: the typography, the button, the two buttons. So as these three will be sitting next to each other because they are wrapped inside of a box with a display of flicks, what we can do is we can wrap the middle one inside of a box, just so that we can add some margin in the x-axis, which is going to be left and right of about 2. If we do that, let's take a look, and that is looking perfect, I think. Well, just a side note, practically the primary button should be the one with the background color and it should be outlined, but I think we can make an exception. I really like the design, so let's just keep it the way that it is. Anyway, now let's work on the modal, the dialog component, and for this we're going to use the dialog component over here to have something like this. So the dialog component, it works with few other components in conjunction. Like in order to create a dialog like this, we would have to use few different components for the title, the content, and the actions. Let's do that over here. So getting back to the project, firstly, well, I think for this sort of application, which is pretty small, we can create the modal within the respective directory. Like for the account page, we can create the modal right over here. But normally, like if the size of the application is too big, I prefer to create a separate folder with the name of modals, and I place in all those modals in their respective directories. But again, it's a simple application. Let's create the modal right over here. We can name it as what should we name it? Shorten URL modal .js. And over here we first need to create a functional component, and we need to import a few things from the material UI library. So we first need to import the dialog. As I just said earlier, like a minute ago, that the dialog works with few other components. So we have to import all those. The first one is the dialog, which is actually the wrapper for the entire thing. Then we need to import the dialog title, the dialog. Oops, 1 second. Yep. The dialog title, the dialog content, dialog actions, and we may require the box, button, and what else should we import? Well, I think the default styling will work fine. Anyway, now let's wrap the entire thing inside of the dialog component, where we need to place in the dialog title for the title, in this case shorten URL. Then we need to place in the dialog content for the middle content that goes over here. So in this case we would have to show the input fields. So let's import the text field components as well, which I think we have already covered in the home page. They are something like this. So the text field, there are a few variants, just like the button. We have standard, which is default, filled, and outlined. So I think we will be going with the filled for this modal. Let's do that. Let's place in the text field, change the variant to be of filled. The label for the first one, it has to be name. Let's copy the same thing, change the label to be long URL, same thing, filled. And then next to the dialog content, we will be placing the dialog actions. So the dialog actions contains the actions, which are normally buttons. 1 second. Something like, oops, not this one. This thing, which contains the actions, and it automatically places them to the very end. Anyway, now let's place the button component inside the dialog actions, and the text has to be create, or let's name it shorten URL. I'm still not sure about the name, but never mind. So I think that's it. Let's take a look. And there's one more thing that we have to do. On the dialog component, we need to pass in the full width prop. Otherwise, the size of it will be as much as the content which goes inside of it. So, whoops, what did I do? Oh, dialog, and yep. So if we do not pass this prop, then it's going to be as much as the size of the content which goes inside of it. But by passing in the full width, we ensure that it has like a minimum amount of width, which actually look nice. So now let's import the shorten URL modal inside the account page, and we can place it any way that we want, because it has the stylings which will make it appear the way that it should be, like in the way that it should be. So if we do that, the first thing that we will notice that even though we have added the modal on the page, we still cannot see it anywhere. The reason is that the dialog component that we are using, it works with a state, like it needs to have a prop of open with the value of true. If this is like, if you're passing this thing, then the dialog component will be visible. If we do that, there we have the dialog. As you can see, we need to fix a few things, as these two are sitting next to each other. For this, on the text field component, we can pass in the full width prop, which will enforce them to take in the entire space, and in the same way, like to sit on top of each other. If we do that, that's perfect. I think we can wrap either one of them inside of a box. Oops. And one more thing, in the upcoming version of Material UI, the version 5, there will be a prop available which goes by the name of SX, and using this we would be able to add in the styling something like this, which is pretty neat. Anyway, for the time being, we kind of need to wrap the element in order to add the margin or padding. The other solution or the other way would be to use inline styling, like something like this, which is obviously possible, but I prefer using the box just to maintain the same spacing, as we are able to use the spacing in a numeric form. Like if I pass in 3, is going to be 8 into 3, 24, and this is pretty neat. So now if we take a look, we do have the spacing, so that's perfect. Let's change the color of the button. Let's do that. We can change the color to be primary and the variant to be contained, and the disable elevation just to remove the shadow. If we do that, there we have the button. You might notice that it is way too close to the edges, and this is something which is material design related, not the library, but something which is design related, and like they prefer to keep a little less padding on the dialog action which goes at the very end. But I prefer to have the same amount of spacing as it looks consistent, and this thing looks ugly. So for this, we can wrap the button inside of a box. Let's add some margin to the right of about 2 and some margin in the Y, top and bottom, of about 1. If we do that, well, that's looking perfect. So I think the last thing left is just to add the close button. Although the user will be able to close the dialog by clicking outside somewhere around here, but it's a nice thing to have a close button which gives the impression that the user can close the modal by clicking on it. So for that, we first need to import the close icon from the material icons package. Let's do that. The name of the icon is close, and we can rename it as close icon. And we also need to import the icon button. So the icon button is the same thing as a normal button, but it's built for icon. Speak for itself. So now inside the dialog title, we can wrap the content inside of a box in such a way, and right over here we can place the close well wrapped inside of the icon button. Next to the text, we can place the icon button and the close icon inside of it. So the icon button also takes a prop of size, where the default value is medium. So I will be setting it to be small just to lower the size of the clickable portion. If we do that, there we have the button, and now we just need to push it all the way to the right side. So for this, as we are wrapping these two, the text and the icon button inside of a box, we can set the display to be of flex, the align items for the cross axis to be of center, and the justify content to be of space between. If we do that, there we have the button. Perfect. So I think that's it for the design for this modal. Now what do we need to do? We need to have a state in order to hold the values of these two input fields. So let's do that. Let's import the useState hook from React, and we kind of need to do the same thing which we did in the home page. Right over here, we have the state. We are going to do the same thing, and we would have to we need to have the same function. So I will be copying this function from this file, the home page, the home component. It's exactly the same. Let's copy it, and 1 second, we need the useState. Let's place the function first, and now right over here we need to have a state with the name of form, and the function to be setForm. Using the useState, we will be passing in an object, and in this case we require to have two properties, one for the name and the other one for the long URL. Let's do that. Name to be an empty string, long URL to be an empty string as well. That being done, let's bind the values. So on the first text field, now in case you feel like that I'm kind of rushing up the process, this is something which we have already done. So if you feel like, you can just lower down the speed, or you can just pause the video anytime that you wish. Anyway, on the first text field, let's first pass in the value, which has to point to the respective property. And as it is for the name, it has to point to the name property that we have over here. Let's do that. Form.name, name has to be name, exactly the same, and the on change has to be the handle change. Let's pass in the same three props on the other one. The value and the name has to be long URL. Oops, I think I made long URL, not this name, but the actual value. And 1 second. When the user clicks on the button, for the time being, we can just log the state to the console by adding the inline anonymous function console.log passing in the form. If we do that, the form should be working. Let's see. So something went wrong. Find DOM node. Okay, I think this is something related to the dialog component, which is pretty weird. Let me just check. So inside of it, if I comment this thing, do we still have it? Yep, it's because of the dialog component. Okay, so we will get to it. Never mind, for the time being, let's ignore it. So now if I click on the button, we have the default state, but if I type something over here, it's being like it's bound to the state, which is perfect. So I think we can actually but before we have to adding the we need to add the thing so that the user can open the modal. We do not want it to be opened like always. This doesn't have to be true like always, but we will do this conditionally. We have to have a state for this thing to be visible. So let's do that.